Good afternoon. I'll call to order the May 17th meeting of the Oversight Board to the successor agency of the Redevelopment Agency of the Town of Los Gatos. And we have a new board member, Rebecca and Haggerty. Welcome. You're replacing Ms. Liu. Great. Would you please call the roll?
Thank you and good afternoon. Tracy Hess.
Present.
Rebecca Haggerty.
Here.
Ed Meduli.
Here.
Steve Rice.
Here.
Leslie Politis.
Here.
Jessica Von Bork. Present. Mike Rock.
Here.
Great. Would you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first item on our agenda today is approval of the minutes from the previous board meeting, which was April the 12th. Does anybody have any? I'm sorry, Ms. Larson.
Yes, we did receive a communication from one board member, Ms. Leslie Politis, about minutes, and it's really discretion of the board. Our practice is to report actions of the board, which are motions approved or motions denied. If a motion does not get a second, it was never up for action, so we did not include that. We are willing to include that, and you could direct us to include that in the motion. What Ms. Politis was asking about was a motion made by Board Member Von Bork at the last meeting that died for lack of a second, so there was never a board action on it. Our practice is not to include that. If the board wants us to, we will. We don't have a recommendation for you. It's just totally your preference.
Okay, is there any strong feeling either way? I'm comfortable with the way we've been doing it, but if...
Yeah, no, I don't have a strong feeling about it at all. I just noticed that it wasn't listed in the minutes, and also that in the minutes, item 3, which was agendized as authorizing transition agreements, the motion that was made was about amending the ROPS, which isn't about the transition agreement. So the motion that was actually made and documented in the minutes is relative to agenda item 1. And
Yes.
I wouldn't want there to be any confusion that the way it's written in the minutes implies that a favorable motion was made on item 3, which is the one that died with that lack of a second. But I was just wondering if we all were okay with that or clear with that.
And if I can,
I was confused.
Please, Mr. Larson.
if I can explain how we proceeded. The staff recommendation, which there was a motion made that died for lack of a second, with the motion that's recorded here is chronologically presented correctly, and it was basically, I would view it under Robert's rules, a substitute motion made by the board and approved. Rather than approving the transition agreements to allow the library cost as an alternative, after discussion with staff and county staff, you agreed to amend the prior ROPS to
Right.
include certified library expenses, and you
Right.
did that as an alternative to the other motion. So I think chronologically this is correct, and as stated, it does not in any way imply approval of the transition agreements.
Okay.
Plus, we have the videotape that documents that.
Okay, and I, you know what, and I recall exactly what it is that we did,
Yeah.
and so if that is based on what you know about Robert's Rule of Order and attorney's recommendation, well understood here, I'm comfortable with it.
We're trying to do action minutes to make it simpler rather
Yeah, yeah.
than verbatim
Okay,
minutes, because we do have the videotape log for those who want it.
okay.
Great, thank you. Any other questions on the minutes? Then I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Mr. Meduli. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Van Bork. Any discussion? Those in favor, aye, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay. Now is the time for verbal communications, where anybody from the public who wishes to speak on an item not on today's agenda, you'll have up to 3 minutes to do so. There's a little buff. Well, we don't even do the cards, do we? We do the cards. Okay, we have little cards in front of you. If you wish to speak, you can fill one of those out, but you don't have to do that ahead of time. So in the interest of moving things along, you can do it afterwards. If anybody wishes to speak on an item not on today's agenda, don't all rush to the microphone at once. Seeing none, gone. We'll close verbal communications and move on to new business. Agenda item 1, which is approval of the administrative budget for July 1 through December 31. And staff report by Ms. Hariyama.
Good evening, Chair and members of the board. I do not have a staff report for item number 1. It is relatively self-explanatory as the attachment 2, but I would be happy to entertain any questions at this time.
Any questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Rock.
so what is the amount that we're approving, the 125,000, or the amount that was just a skosh more than that?
My understanding is the limit's 125 regardless of what we approve, correct?
We'll take the maximum that the Oversight Board is willing to approve for us today, which is $125,207.
Just for clarification, state legislation created $250,000 per year. While there's been discussions at this oversight board regarding that it's 125 per ROPS, if for some reason that we don't meet the 125, or it may not always work out to be an even distribution over the fiscal year, but it is a $250,000 cap that the state will impose on us.
Per fiscal year, not 125 per 6 months.
Right. Does that answer your question, Mr. Rock?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
What did we approve last time relative to fiscal years? We're starting a new fiscal year now? So this is the first half of the next fiscal year? Okay.
For this admin budget, it's the first half of the next fiscal
So
year.
we're still within the 250 limit, even though we're over 125? Okay.
I would like to mention, I think it would be a pragmatic move to go with the $125,000 limit, and that keeps us clean in each 6-month period. In fact, I'd be willing to make a motion on that behalf.
Okay, so you make a motion to approve the 125?
Is now the time for that?
Yeah, we can certainly entertain a motion and then have discussion on it, so, yes.
So I'd like to move to adopt the $125,000 administrative budget for the period of July through December 2012.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second. Any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries 6-1. Ms. Van Bork was the nay. All right. Item number 2, approval of the ROPS for July 1 through December 31. And I believe we got, I'll call it 2 desk items here. Is that correct? We have
You
one that came
received-
from the agency.
Correct.
And then one that came from the county. And I know I've said this before, and I'll probably end up, I hope I don't have to say it again, but please try to coordinate all distributions through the agency so that we can make sure we don't have duplicates or variations any more so than we already are stuck with. Because we now have 2 desk items that are kind of competing, and I'd like staff, if they would clarify, I would greatly appreciate it.
And I'll let Ms. Hariyama clarify the differences. I also want to just follow on the mayor's comment, as was in my note to the board. We have an obligation to make all documentation received by the board available to the public, and we're requesting that any communications that are sent directly to the board be sent to myself, Ms. Hariyama, and Ms. Prop, so we can make sure you're complying with the law. We would hate there ever to be an accusation that documents sent to you for your consideration at this board meeting were not made available to the public, which has happened for this board previously because we were left out of the distributions.
And just to clarify, county management has reached out and has confirmed that they will be meeting with town staff, successor agency staff, to try to do a better job of coordination. So just to let you know that that effort has been made.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so I think for simplicity purposes, I would respectfully request that the board refer to the desk item that's prepared by the successor agency. I have looked at the distribution that was made by the county. They are virtually the same document. I would like to point out the one difference, and you could turn to any page of the document that was provided to you by the county. If you look in the footer, there is some language, the 4th sentence down, where it says Funding sources from the successor agency, says parentheses, for fiscal year 2011 to 12 only. We made a request to strike that language, but the county has indicated that this is actually DOF language, and upon our confirmation of that, we will determine whether to retract that request. But that is essentially the only difference between the two documents that you have before you. That's why I'm requesting that you work with the desk item provided by the successor agency.
And just to be clear, if I may, Mr. Mayor, since I'm kind of new to this like most of you, Mr. Chair, sorry. So the only difference between the desk item you sent earlier today and provided and what was handed out by the county is that footnote on each of the extra large sheets.
Correct. The successor agency staff has requested, as we move further into item agenda 3, some modifications, and that's where you see some differences. However, we have attached what has been handed out to you as well on the desk item. So again, they are virtually the same.
Okay.
So just briefly, what I'll do is I'll take you through agenda item 2. Our goal today is to approve the May 14th, 2012 recertified ROPS. That's attachment 3A in your desk item, and it replaces staff report attachment item 3.
If I may orient the board, on your dais as well as an email, you received something that says desk item in the top right on the cover staff report. And then if you open to the first extra large sheet, it's labeled attachment 3A. And that replaces attachment 3 from the county that was in your original packet.
Is attachment 3A still dated May 14th?
Yes.
Mine is.
Okay, just want to make
Yes.
sure.
They're clearly marked on the date at the top center and on the bottom right.
Okay.
And if you just use your desk item as a reference, that will help you guide through the discussion today. If you turn to Form B, which is all revenue sources other than redevelopment property tax trust fund, I'll walk you through the differences between what was previously attached on the staff report and what is before you today.
And again, I'll keep jumping in. For the desk handout, it's the back side of the first large sheet is Form B.
What is on the visual screen right here is the attachment that you should be looking at Form B on attachment 3A. And if I could just get a nod from the board if we're all oriented, that would be great. Okay, what I'll do is I'll just take you through really quickly some of the changes. What happens is on this document, 2 items have been relocated. They have been relocated from the original attachment of attachment 3 from Form C to Form B, and they are the items to your left. They're items 2 and 3 on your Form B. And they include the wind down activities and the legal services. These were originally included on the administrative allowance Form C page, but they have been relocated to Form B, which is basically all other revenue sources other than the RPTTF. And this certification is contingent upon the Oversight Board approval for this. The funding source is other, which basically essentially allows the successor agency to pay for these items out of available fund balance.
Can you clarify what that other fund balance is, where that comes from?
If you look down on your footer, there is a notation that's provided by the DOF that says other, and it says dash reserves, rents, interest earnings, etc. We're referring to reserves, fund balance reserves in our RDA, and that is what other is defined as.
So those are RDA fund balance reserves, is that correct?
That is what we are referring to as other, yes.
Okay. And my understanding is we haven't determined where those reserves belong at this point, and given statute, those reserves are not necessarily Los Gatos RDA money, but belong to all the taxing jurisdictions, is that correct?
That is not how I understand it. I'm going to defer to the manager, the attorney, to clarify that.
First, what's before you is a submittal from the county that your agency staff concurs with. And so we do concur with this presentation under Form B. We do have the residual question about the footnote change. Our actual recommendation will be for smoothness of process, to adopt the ROPS with the footnote the county has requested. Then we will independently verify that as DOF direction and report back to you separately. But Form B is coming to you with the footnote added back in as provided by the county. So that is our recommendation.
Ms. Maduli, go ahead.
Are there sufficient reserves to cover these items?
Yes, there are at this time.
So with respect to the question by Board Member Hess, there are, as many of the county staff has already pointed out, there was a distribution of increment funding. There's been a variety of distributions throughout the period of the former redevelopment agency, and most recently even earlier before this year in 2012 before the dissolution. And many agencies have fund balances, and in fact the county has acknowledged that certain increment was distributed in January that will need to be used to obligate the pay the obligations of the agency for this period from July through December 2012. The county, as we'll discuss later, has indicated to Los Gatos that we will not be receiving any June distributions. So unless that these funds are paid out of our existing fund balances, we'll be in a potential default situation.
Okay.
I see there are county councils here. Maybe they might have some comments on this topic.
Okay, well, I want to get through the board first, if there's any other questions from the board members.
I have a question on Form B.
Please, Ms.
Yeah,
Polite.
so thank you. Line item 2, RDA wind down activities, has a footnote saying it's an administrative item whose certification by the county auditor controller is expressly made contingent on the oversight board's approval of this item as part of the successor agency administrative budget. So I'm just trying to, I guess, understand what wind down activities are specifically, and the relationship between those and the other administrative budget that we just approved in item 1.
The wind down activities are the extra overhead costs caused by the dissolution of the RDA, which the successor agency didn't view as part of administrative costs because they are beyond the existing overhead that already occurs for the day-to-day operations. And so that is what's comprised of the wind down activities. The same thing goes with the legal costs as well. These are legal costs beyond what has already been budgeted for the day-to-day operation of continuing the successor agency.
So I understand legal costs, and I understand what we just approved on the administrative list. Those are all expenses that make sense to me. Extra overhead costs for dissolution, like, is there a schedule of what that 116,000 is made up of, or what? I'm still struggling with the definition.
This was actually discussed in detail at a prior board meeting with the breakdown of the number of hours for each management that's associated with the additional overhead that's caused as a result of the dissolution. I don't have that data in front of me at this time.
But we should have it in our
you should have it in
records
prior
from prior
packets.
meetings. Okay.
Yes, that's
and,
correct.
And this number then has the documentation for this number is in prior packages. It's not a new number.
This is not a new number, no.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Larson and...
I'll defer to the board
Okay,
member.
Mr. Rock?
Yes, another question, just so I understand, following up on what Leslie was asking, a little bit more amplification on the cost. These types of costs, the justification, look very similar to the things that the board considered at the last meeting and we disallowed. Irrespective of the dollar amounts, we just thought, if my recollection is correct, that wind downs were something that we would not include in this type of deal, and the successor agency was going to be asked to absorb this in their ongoing administrative costs, however fair that or unfair that might be. I don't know, but in any case, these look familiar, and I don't know why the county put them on the ROPS we don't direct the county what to do, but I would have thought that if we had turned them down the first time, that they would not have been certified the second time. So am I missing something here? Are these different than the kinds of costs we
If I could help clarify that, the successor agency originally had requested that these two items be included on the amounts that would be taken from the RPTTF, which is very different than being inclusive of other or admin costs. We were arguing that they should not be included in admin, but again, our original argument that we brought forward to the board was that they should be taken from RPTTF. The county has submitted a recertified document that is affording us the opportunity to take it from our RDA reserves, which of course is other. And so this is a very different discussion than what we had originally provided to the Oversight Board in prior meetings.
But either way, whether they come out of the trust fund or a reserve, it doesn't really matter what bucket they come out of. They come out of a bucket of money that our charter is to liquidate the assets and unwind the liabilities as fast as we can. That's pretty much what our charter is. So we're trying to figure out, we're getting into a lot of administrative stuff, which we would like to be as helpful as we can, but we haven't yet really been given anything to do with our charter. So we're not helping dissolve assets or unwind liabilities. We're just helping approve a lot more payments to the successor agency to do that. How can we help? How can we start doing those activities and understand what is being done to achieve those activities? Because trust fund or reserve fund, it's still money that's not going to flow to the taxing entities until we get through these transition steps, right?
And the work that's being covered is getting through those transition steps.
right,
So
right.
that's exactly where you need to go, and under the
And by
executive director's...
statute, Judith, is it appropriate for these costs to be? You wouldn't ask us to approve payments that weren't allowed by statute. So this isn't linked to that minimum for the year.
Not only would the successor agency not ask for costs to be allowed or placed on a certified ROPS, the county also has an obligation when they do the review and audit to ensure that those are proper items. Whether or not the board approves that is within your discretion, but it certainly was the belief of both the successor agency and presumably, since the county actually moved those items from a different category and believed that they were appropriate in the other category, as Ms. Huriana explained, certainly that's something that the county may want to speak to, but we believe that these are items that not only are allowable, but have been approved by the DOF and for other agencies.
All right, let me go ahead and go to County Council.
Can I actually offer a comment? And having studied these, the ROPS from the county and looking at this footnote D, I'm looking at note D quite carefully. My reading on this is that we're actually not approving these expenditures today. We're actually approving the rest of the ROPS, and then these expenditures would be considered along with other administrative expenditures in future admin type of areas. And that's when I read, this is an administrative item whose certification is expressly made contingent on the Oversight Board's approval of this item as part of the successor agency administrative budget for this ROPS. So I believe that by approving this ROPS today, we aren't actually approving these two line items to be spent. We're just saying, kind of, I guess, football terms, punting to the next one and including this in a future discussion on administrative costs.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. James Williams, Deputy County Counsel. I think I can provide a little clarification on Note D and on the distinction that's at issue here, because it's a bit nuanced. The administrative cost allowance, which is 34171 subdivision B, the administrative cost allowance, the $250 for the fiscal year, is a cap on the distribution from the trust fund. To the extent that there are other revenue streams or other sources of funding, for example, reserves that the agency has, those can be used for administrative costs beyond the allowance, but only subject to Oversight Board approval in the administrative budget. That was item number 1 on today's agenda. So the footnote D here is saying that these two items could be paid out of existing reserves that the agency has if approved by the board in the budget, and as I recall from the last meeting, there was discussion about these items, specifically line 2, the wind down activities, and the board at that last meeting, that was the motion that did not receive a second, that the decision was made not to include that item. But that's something for the board to decide as part of the administrative budget discussion. And if the board decides to approve the use of those reserves, that would then be a permissible use, and it would appear on Form B. The one thing I want to state about the reserves is that under 34177 subdivision D, the successor agency has a duty to remit all fund balances, all unencumbered fund balances, to the auditor controller for distribution to the taxing entities. So it is a decision to reduce the amount of reserve available for distribution and commit a portion of that to these costs. We believe the Oversight Board has that authority, that it can commit to use a portion of those reserves for these other administrative costs beyond the cap. But that's a decision for the board to make consistent with its fiduciary obligations as part of the administrative budget. And so I did want to point that distinction out, and that's why Note D specifically says it's contingent upon approval as part of the administrative budget under Section 34177J. And if you read the full sentence of Form D, of Note D, that's what that says. So I hope that provides some clarification on the distinction between the reserves, the administrative cost allowance cap, and how that fits with the administrative budget.
Thank you. Mr. Larson?
Yes, with Mr. Williams' clarification, I'd recommend, and given Board Member Polides' question, we will bring back to you the detail you had before on item 2, which is the wind down activities, for consideration at your next meeting as a potential addition to the administrative budget. However, given that the legal consulting services is kind of clear and there is no additional detail, we would recommend you approve that as part of the administrative budget when you approve this as part of the ROPS. And that would be our recommendation for today's action.
Okay, fine, thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Just one other addition.
Yeah, go ahead.
And the funding to pay for these would be coming out of the reserves.
Per what the county has given us in the schedule, that they saw this coming out of other rather than out of our PPTF. Line 3 alone would come out of other, as specified by the state. And line 2 would be subject to your future review and discretion.
Thank you. All right, so any other questions, or did you have something, Madam Attorney?
Just for clarification, since there's been a lot of, and we'll certainly let County Council indicate if they don't agree with this, but going back to it, again, with footnote D, you still can certify the ROPS as proposed with this item returning as far as whether or not you'll allow it to be with line item D, line item 2 with note D returning back to the board with further clarification and subsequent consideration whether you'll approve that item under admin expenditure.
So we don't have the detail that's been asked by the board for number 2, so before we'd ask you to approve that as part of the admin budget, we'd return with that detail. But approving it in the ROPS is conditioned on you approving it later for the admin.
Everybody clear on that? You have a question, Ms. Hager?
No, but I actually have a motion.
Go right ahead.
So I would like to move that we approve the recognized obligation payment schedule covering July through December 2012 as certified by the county on May 14th. And I would like to emphasize that includes note D for both items, so that both those items would come back as administrative expenses in the future.
Both items being numbers 2 and 3.
Yes, and note D would stand as it is on the ROPS, and so we would approve the ROPS as it stands, as the county submitted it.
But this came from the county as well, is that
But,
so?
yeah. So
Okay.
I'm saying let's approve the county's ROPS, the certified ROPS.
Okay. I have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Hess. Discussion?
And that is what your staff is recommending. We would recommend inclusion of the footnote that came from the county today. That wasn't in this desk item, and then we will independently verify that with DOF and report back to you.
Okay, is that acceptable to the motion maker?
Right, I believe it wasn't the note D, I think, has been on the item the whole time.
No, it's a different footnote.
Oh, the other footnote.
The other footnote.
Yeah, the other footnote's
Excuse me,
not.
the other footnote.
The other
No.
footnote.
Yeah.
The other footnote.
I knew what
wait-
you meant.
Yeah, too many footnotes.
So that's acceptable to the motion maker and to the seconder?
So the other note would not be changed, right? It would
Correct.
It would stay with the original wording.
Correct. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. On to,
Mr. Mayor, just to clarify, do you want us to address the legal counsel as part of the administrative budget today, or to bring that back separately? There is no additional detail on that, so that's why I raise it as an issue.
I'll look to the board for any preference.
I would suggest that maybe you just bring back the explanation without the detail with the other ones so that we'll look at them together next time as administrative cost.
Okay, seems to be a sense of the board.
Yeah, and I think if there's any, if I recall this is a little bit intertwined with my question about the minutes, because we did, the motion to include these last time, it was probably what the detail, or was based on looking at those schedules last time that we don't have here today. And I recall asking if other RDAs were including those types of expenses. So if you have any benchmarks of other RDAs who are experiencing these same kind of dissolution costs in transition, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So we'll agendize that portion for our meeting of May 29th, I believe it is. Item number 3, approve the revised successor agency ROPS for January to June 30th, 2012.
Thank you. So, successor agency staff is requesting that the board consider approval of the May 15th, 2012 recertified ROPS with some modifications that will come into discussion later. This item is referred to your desk item as attachment 4A, which again is duplicative of what the county had passed out to you earlier. Our modification request is reflected as attachment 4B. And this does replace the staff report attachment number 4, which you do not have to refer to at this time. The driver for this item was that the successor agency received a letter from the DOF requesting clarification on funding sources. And one of the first changes that was made in the certified ROPS that's before you from the county was changing the library item, which if you could be oriented to attachment 4A, Form B. And I'll wait till the board arrives at that page.
Okay.
There's only one item on that page on Form B, which is the completion of the library project. And this item originally was reflected as FPTT, that acronym /other. We only needed to have one acronym, and other, again, we had this discussion earlier, is where this monies would come out of the remaining RDA fund balance. And so that was one of the changes that was before you on that item. There's really no discussion at this point from the successor agency staff other than to make that notation to the board that that change was made. Subsequent conversation that I have prepared for you is to discuss the modifications that we request for this attachment. So before I move on to the next slide, does the board have any questions about just the changing of the funding source language?
And if I may be clear, these are all expenses that per your prior board meeting have been audited and certified by county staff.
Okay. Mr. Meduli.
However, there is one change in Form B, and that is the fact that this library is now being funded by other. And are there sufficient funds this fiscal year to cover this amount?
There are sufficient funds in the fund balance. Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Go ahead and, unless there's any other questions, we'll move on.
So the next slide shows attachment 4A, Form C. And this is what the county has certified. And if you look at the total outstanding obligation column, which is highlighted in white, this number reflects the total amount of obligation for the remaining life of the agency. And these numbers, I'm assuming, according to county staff, are placeholders. We do not feel like that they are accurate numbers. And in attachment B, we have numbers that we would like to supplement into this column. And if I could orient you to the attachment B. Form C, does the board have that in front of them at this time? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you'll note that the numbers are different, and I would like to walk you through how those numbers were calculated. If you look at the column to my right of the highlighted white column, that's the total due during the fiscal year, and this represents 6 months. So what we did is we took a full year, we multiplied the item in that column times 2, and then multiplied that times the remaining life of the agency, which is 17 years. And that's how we arrived at the numbers that are in the highlighted column. And we would request that we would have these numbers replaced in what was submitted before you at this time.
And we have discussed this in advance with county staff.
County internal audit staff, yes.
And they're comfortable with those changes?
They did not have any concerns on us submitting this before the Oversight Board today.
Thank you. Questions?
Oh, go ahead.
Go.
I'm sorry.
Ms. Hess.
My understanding is we're winding down. 17 years sounds like a long time for a wind down. Where did you come up with the 17-year?
That's the remaining life of the agency.
Did you say that you took a 6-month expenditure and rolled it forward for 17 years, though? So I think the question is that the cost would be more in the first 6 months than the next 17. The cost would start to become less over 17 years, I think was the thought.
It's hard to determine what those costs are going to be. However, this item was requested to be filled in on the prior ROPS that was just approved, the July through the December ROPS, by the county. We were requested to provide these numbers to the county,
right,
and we provided them in the same mechanism as what we're doing now, so we are being consistent. The only reason why we're taking this back and realize this now is because the DOF had brought it to our attention about the correction of the funding source. But it came to our attention that these were not accurate numbers, and for consistency purposes, we wanted to make sure that we were providing those numbers and that the county was not.
That makes perfect sense to me. It doesn't answer my question about the expectation that expenses will decrease over time. And maybe this isn't the place to ask that question. Okay.
The expectation that expenses would decrease was reflected for larger redevelopment agencies, where there was 5% the first fiscal year, 3% in fiscal year for administrative costs. We're a smaller redevelopment agency, which has the statutory minimum of $250 per fiscal year. The 17 years reflects the stated life by creation of the redevelopment agency, as well as outstanding debt service. However, I believe it's in 2016, the Oversight Board moves to being a countywide Oversight Board, if I trying to reflect back to the prior presentation. Using what was submitted by the county, just going back to the prior one, to say that the total due during the fiscal year is $7,300, but that the total outstanding debt or obligation is $3,800 is internally inconsistent. and we're trying to correct that with no other basis on which to use. We just took the allowed allocation as apportioned out, multiplied it out, knowing that per Note B, all of this is pending certification of assets and liabilities per Note B.
Okay, so it's
these are really placeholders
that we
to project future maximum obligations.
And we, unless I'm mistaken, we review these every 6 months anyway for the real numbers.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other questions? Okay, so I'll look for a motion to approve the revised successor agency ROPS from January 1, 2012 through June 30, 2012.
Can I ask, actually, sorry, can I ask a question? So if we make adjustments to this ROPS, then we need to go back through the county and recertify and create another document for these placeholder numbers, right? So I'm just kind of wondering if we want to go that route or if we want to just go ahead and approve the ROPS kind of as it stands and clarify these placeholder numbers and get them more accurate, which I think is a great goal through the audit process and through the next round of the next ROPS period. It's kind of a process thing because, so many
Let
ROPS.
me answer.
Ms.
Especially
Larson.
that column of total outstanding debt or obligation could probably be changed every month. And I don't think the county, us or the DOF are interested in constant recertification of the ROPS. We are on deadlines to certify a ROPS at this time. The total outstanding debt or obligation is an estimate. It's not an approval for expenditure. And with each successive ROP, we'll be updating those numbers based on audit work that's done in the meantime and clarification of state law and determination of county practices.
So, just a quick question. In other words,
Please.
this is an opportunity for us to clean everything up and keep it consistent and streamlined moving forward then, with approving this.
The methodology that was used with the numbers before you is the same methodology that was on your prior ROPS for the July through December. And so, yes, to agree, consistent purposes is what we're trying to accomplish here today.
To be blunt, I think there are at least 4 groups of finance people looking at every one of these documents. You have at least one set in the county, one set in your agency, one set in DOF, and one set in the state controller. To send forward a document as originally submitted that says our total outstanding debt or obligation is less than what you're approving for this year seems to me to be something that's automatically going to be kicked back. We might as well use the best data available pending the audits, knowing we update it every 6 months.
Right.
In that case, I move that we approve the revised ROP.
Motion by Mr. Maduli. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Ms. Paulides. Sorry. Paulides? I had it right the first time. Then I correct myself. Any further discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, moving on to item 4, approval of the Oversight Board rules and regulations. Ms. Propp, you're going to do the staff report?
Yes, thank you, Chair and board members. Just briefly, you've now had the proposed rules and regulations for at least 3 weeks since we canceled the prior meeting. Just a couple of things that you need to consider as you move forward that we thought we'd let the board consider is in Section 501 on regular meetings. Many of you who sit on other boards have already decided on, for those oversight boards, to pick a particular day and time consistent each month, whether you meet once or twice a month, and that works on your schedule. What we had originally asked this oversight board, knowing that things were in such flux and moving at such a rapid rate, to actually for the first 6 months approve specific dates and times. You have the option going forward is that if that's more convenient for all of you who sit on this oversight board, each 6-month period, staff can bring back a proposed calendar, keeping in mind now that we have the master calendar for all the other oversight boards and knowing what your other obligations are with respect to other oversight boards in the county. We're happy to continue the practice of picking and choosing specific dates and times that maybe you're able to accommodate. Otherwise, if the board does want to go to a specific date and time, then successor agency staff will look at the town calendar and the availability of staff and make sure it doesn't conflict with other previously scheduled meetings and come back to you with a proposed date certain and time for the rest of for the new fiscal year, July 1 through June 30th of 12/13. So as you consider this, I'll go through 3 items that we'd like you to consider. That's your discretion. On 6 600B on the agenda, there's been discussions, I think, at every meeting, including today, about an orderly process. Both the successor agency staff and county staff on multiple occasions have promised that we would not inundate this board with last-minute items, and yet, once again, here we are today asking your indulgence because we got last-minute items. So what we've proposed and is in the rules is that any requests for agenda items be sent in writing to the successor agency staff at least a week before the scheduled meeting, and so that we can add that to the agenda. And what we didn't add specific language in the packet, but at the request of the chair and is on the overhead, what the staff report asks is that you add the language that all documents for agendized items be delivered to the successor agency not less than 4 working days before the meeting so that we can get it out to you in an orderly fashion. You have additional time to review it, and we have it made available to the public and posted on our website. And again, that's for the board's consideration and can be added to the proposed rules. And lastly, on section 605 is also the board's discretion, is the reconsideration of vote provision. When in drafting these rules, as we indicated to you, we had looked at all the other oversight board rules, and we're one of the pretty far down the chain on oversight boards to finally bring forward the rules and adopt. Many of you have seen them from your other appointments. The agencies were really split on those that included the reconsideration of vote and those that don't. If it's not provided for, arguably there may be no remedy if the board does want to reconsider a vote after it's taken. At least putting in this matter gives you that option of having a process to do that. So it's totally at your discretion. It's split between the other oversight boards as to who included it or not, and that's for your consideration. And I'm available for questions on these items as well as any other rules and procedure matters set forth in this attachment 5 for your consideration.
Great. Well, I'll weigh in first, I guess. What the heck? I'm very comfortable with the rules and regulations as they've been proposed. I would like to add section B. I would be in favor of that to item 600, and I prefer rather than trying to pick a specific day of each month that we approve the schedule on a quarterly basis as brought to us by staff. I think that gives us the flexibility as to hopefully as things get a little simpler as time goes on, that we could not be tied into twice a month if once a month will do type of a thing. So I'll open it up to others and any other comments or questions.
I have a couple questions. I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Hess.
You said when you were talking about this section B that no less than 4 days prior to the meeting, and yet as written here it says 4 days prior to posting of the agenda. I would be agreeable to 4 days prior to the meeting.
You did say that actually, and that's the way I didn't read it again until you just said that.
I think that's what was intended.
Because that would make it available prior to the posting. So yes, I would be totally acceptable to that.
Okay, and the second question I had is in section 502, where it says special meetings. My understanding of the Brown Act is that a special meeting can be called either by the person presiding or or 2 or more members. Can we make this section state a special meeting may be called subject to the requirements of the Brown Act and leave it at that so that we have the flexibility to use the Brown Act as appropriate rather than limiting it to the chair of the board?
Is that acceptable under the Brown Act? I'm not familiar enough with the specifics on that.
The board could certainly specify that. Again, that would allow discretion of all the board members without coordination with the chair is what's being proposed. So that's totally at your discretion. There's nothing that precludes you from adding that kind of a language to this. And again, we took this issue specifically from most of the other oversight boards, and that language is the exception rather than the norm for Santa Clara County oversight boards.
Which language is the exception?
Exception to allow special meetings to be called by other than the successor agency or the chair.
So what you have before you is the norm, the suggestion.
Thank you. That's what I was at.
Okay. And lastly is, you also have the, you can ask for a special meeting. It would still be subject to coordination with the successor agency to ensure that staff is available and the facilities are available.
I agree with that. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, good.
It's just, as I work on a couple of these boards, and I know there's so much going on right now, but I think I just have this vision that over the next year or so, it's going to mellow out a bit and be a little bit easier. And I'm thinking we should maybe build in some flexibility here. And I'm wondering if we could replace the word, was on the other one, I think you said shall be 4 days before. Could we put like maybe should, just to give us a little bit more flexibility when we have so many moving parts? And we might need that flexibility going forward instead of kind of having the stricter shall or must, have something like should be 4 days before the meeting.
I think that's what the wording says now, doesn't it?
No, it says shall.
It says
It's up on the
shall.
board.
Shall is,
Are we using the board, the stuff up on the screen and not what was in the hard copy?
yeah, I'm looking at the proposed additional wording that the successor agency is putting up here, and it's shall be received. I'm just wondering, can we replace shall with should? You know, that would be our goal, and that would build us in some flexibility with so many moving parts. And I anticipate that we won't need that provision that much, especially going into the deeper future. But it would give us some flexibility.
It would. My concern would be that then you might as well not have that sentence, because a should doesn't compel anything, and if somebody wants to drop something a day before, they still can. And I think that the intent is for the public and the responsibilities that we have as members of the board is to make sure that this is an open and public and transparent process. I personally, I wouldn't be comfortable with a should. It really does need to be a shall for me.
And if I may clarify, both the original document and the language on the screen use the word shall.
Madam
Just for
Attorney?
clarification, going back to Board Member Hess on 502 on special meetings, in reviewing some of the other oversight boards, she is correct that many of them just leave it at a special meeting may be called subject to the requirements of the Brown Act, period. So again, that's certainly the discretion of this board either way.
Thank you for that clarification.
I would just weigh in that I'm sensitive to the issue that does mean 2 members of the board could call a meeting without the chair, and that out of just respect, I think we would include the chair in terms of information. I may have to sit in for you sometime, and I'd like to know if we're having a special meeting. So.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Any other further discussion? Mr. Maduli?
Yes, we had that discussion in another oversight committee, and what we came down to is, in terms of a compromise, is that if there were 2 or 3 board members that would want a special board meeting, that they at least go through the chair, and that way the chair can go through the agency, and it makes it so much cleaner.
I have no problem with that either. All right. So do we? Somebody
Which
want
is actually the practice we have here for the town of Los Gatos. The mayor, or through the mayor, 2 members of the council can request an item on the agenda. So I'm wondering if we could steal some language here.
Somebody? Okay. Would somebody like to venture a motion? Oh, I'm sorry. Please, Mr. Williams.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify something with regard to the Section 502 comment. What the Brown Act provides with regard to special meetings is that they may be called by the presiding officer or a majority of the body, not 2 members. And that's the exact language in the government code. You can't you can't go broader than that and say you'd let 2 members call a special meeting, for example. It would have to be majority or the chair. What we've been suggesting to boards is that the sentence in 502 just read, a special meeting may be called subject to requirements of the Brown Act, period. And that way, boards have discretion if the chair is not available to have a majority call a special meeting. Of course, chairs usually are the ones who call a special meeting. It would just reflect what's stated in the government code and no deviation from that. So I just wanted to clarify that point because there was confusion about this two-member thing, and that's not what the actual government code provides under the Brown Act.
So it would take 4 members or the chair.
That's correct, and that's what's stated in the Brown Act.
Okay.
I'm ready to make a motion. if you
Please,
are.
Ms.
Okay.
Polito.
Let's see if I can do this right. I move that we approve the Oversight Board rules and regulations with the modifications discussed to end the sentence in Section 502 at the, a special meeting may be called subject to the requirements of the Brown Act, period, and to add the recommended included language in Section 600 for the requirement to have documents be received by the successor agency not less than 4 days prior to the meeting. That's it.
Did you want to address the schedule for regular meetings to be approved on a,
And have the schedule for regular meetings be approved on a quarterly basis.
Madam Attorney?
Just for clarification, quarterly or semi-annually? Do you want us to do it on a quarterly or a 6-month? Okay.
Okay. All right, I have
Suggested.
that was what I suggested. Yeah, I was comfortable with.
Yep. Thank you.
And I second that.
And Mr. Maduli seconds. Any further questions, discussion? Seeing none. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item number 5, Executive Director's Report.
Ms. Clerk, if you could flip over to my slide. So we will periodically agendize follow-up on prior board or board member inquiries and report on those on prior board actions. We have 2 items that were listed on the agenda for today: anticipated tax entity receipts and other county and state communications. While we're getting the slide up, I'll deal with the second one, which is, you've seen them. So the other county and state communications was really the variety of ROPS that you've acted on earlier on the agenda. So I don't have much else to add to that item. As a tee-in to the anticipated tax entity receipts, if your staff has received any inquiries from board members or taxing entities, it kind of gets to the question Vice Chair Polides raised earlier. How much and when do we start getting distributed? And we are not going to give you that answer today because it's not our answer to give. There are a whole lot of variables and questions about that. But we did want to try to tee up the issue because it will be a major focus of your future meetings. And it does get to the crunch of what it is you're all here for. And so we did want to tee up this issue for your future consideration. So I think we can probably jump through these 3 bullets. And I guess there is a slide here, so I can take over. So anticipated tax entity payments, incredibly complex issue, as you'll see. To simplify it as your first introduction, knowing that we will likely draw on potentially state resources as well as county resources, as well as your staff, to further explain this in future meetings, I wanted to do the simple overview first, and then we'll drill down as we move ahead. First, there is fund balance, reserves, or kind of cash in the bank, is distinct from future tax increment distributions. There appear to be, under state law and practices throughout the state, 2 primary distribution methodologies. Fund balance appears to largely being pursued by property tax percentage. From the fund balance, there is some deduction, primarily for county, potentially for state costs to do the work to date. There is then issues of how 20% affordable housing assets, both property and fund balance, will be treated. This is less an issue for the oversight board or the county or the successor agency. It's really the matter of state legislation and the governor's proposed budget on how 20% affordable housing assets will be treated. That's just a big unknown at this point in time. the general word of thumb has been the legislative houses, the Democrats and affordable housing advocates have been advocating for preservation of prior 20% affordable housing fund balance to be used for the purposes of 20% affordable housing, while the governor, schools, counties, many municipal jurisdictions are saying, no, let that flow through to the taxing entities because it becomes resources available to meet the needs of those entities. I think it's out of our collective pay grade to answer that question. It's going to be resolved at the state level, probably through part of the budget adoption process, and there is both trailer budget language from the governor's May revise, as well as legislation that's gone through the Assembly, but not through the Senate, that address this issue, and I'll point out in different ways. So it's a wait and see. There's also a question out there about how ERAF is treated in this distribution. So I mostly lay this as one type of allocation you will be getting, likely all of us will be getting, all the taxing entities, sometime this next fiscal year at an undetermined level to an undetermined outcome pending resolution really of these three issues that are on the screen. But as your first round of education, wanted to provide that. That's the easy one, and you'll see an example of it shortly. The more complex one, which I wouldn't even venture to provide an example today, is future tax increment, how that gets distributed residually to the taxing entities. And at a highest level possible, the issues that arise, if I can get this to click, are first, what is reduced from that tax increment by the state or the county for their old costs? While you have review of our administrative costs, and they're basically capped at $250,000, you do not have any review of state or county costs for their work implementing the dissolution of redevelopment. You then have the enforceable obligations, which the state legislation was quite clear, and we've been working closely with the county to ensure that there is no damage to enforceable obligations that might hurt the creditworthiness not only of individual jurisdictions, but of the state, and arguably under the state law violate the purpose of redevelopment and the debt that was previously issued. A big question that it appears is being handled differently by different counties, and in fact state agencies are even treating it differently. We know the LAO has weighed in that the pass-throughs could or would likely be treated one way. We have anecdotal evidence, but no documentation yet, that DOF, the Department of Finance, is recommending that pass-throughs be treated a different way. We have seen documentation from this county and counties across the state that they're treating pass-throughs differently. Again, I think that's probably all beyond our pay grade, and it's a question that will be resolved by state law, litigation, or other parties, but it is a huge issue that affects ultimate distribution from tax increment residual distributions. Similarly, there's the treatment of ERAF again. Is ERAF an allocated percentage or not? And again, that's an issue like the prior one that's going to be resolved. At great risk and peril, I'm going to give you an example of the complexity of the first one, not of the second one, just so you all have an understanding, going back to Ms. Paulides, Vice Chair Paulides' comment earlier about when do we start getting to the real issue of implementing dissolution, and let you know why I think the state, the county, and your successor agency can't just give you a number tomorrow, because it's not possible to do so. There are so many assumptions. Here's a fund balance, so that's that first model, and it's a distribution example. I've kept it real simple for any of you who are budget officers, like Board Member Rock for the fire district or Vice Chair Paulides. I would not recommend you take any of these numbers and go fold it into your budget action. That's not what this process is for. It's just really to lay out the complexity of the issues. So there's two columns here because I view it as the primary variable on fund balance distribution, and that is how is ERAF treated. And I've just chosen a plug number of $5 million because it's easy to work off of. I've chosen a county deduction level of 4%, which I don't actually think it'll be that high. The only number we've received so far from the county was 3.8%. That was actually for the residual tax increment, which I think is a far more complex property tax allocation. So I suspect the county will ultimately come in with a cost deduction that would be significantly lower than this, but I'm trying to use round numbers. So 5 million minus 4% gets you to 4.8 million. Then you have two different columns. For the first column, you have that 4.8 million allocated by percentage, including for the last two rows, ERAF, the K through 12 portion, and the community college portion of ERAF. And you see it totals 4.8 million plus a rounding error of $1,000, which I wasn't going to bound to correct because all of these are estimates and it's mostly to show you the complexity. But I have listed them, other than the ERAF portion, in descending order of property tax allocation. So Los Gatos Union School District gets the largest allocation, followed by the Union High School District, followed by Central Fire, Santa Clara County, Los Gatos, West Valley Mission, and other is 6 other agencies, what they total up to that I could list out for you, but I didn't for the simplicity of this slide. So you see what comes up. Now the next column is if ERAF is not included as a percentage distribution, and that percentage piece, the ERAF percentage, basically gets rolled up to all the taxing entities above. And the net column on the far right, you can barely see the minus symbols, but it really shows you, even on this most simple of the models we have, how there are winners and losers in the state, the DOF, the state controller, the county, and the other determinations to be made that I actually think far outweigh the determinations to be made by the oversight board in terms of administrative costs or anything else that is within your purview. For the two largest recipients, the Los Gatos Union School District and the Los Gatos Saratoga Union High School District, if ERAF is included or not included, the not included, they lose respectively $150,000 and $100,000 of proceeds from this distribution, while County Fire and the county and the town of Los Gatos all gain between $50,000 and $75,000, depending on that ultimate decision that's made between whether ERAF is included or not included. Shows you the complexity of it, and then when you get to the residual tax increment one, it's actually a 2x2 matrix of variabilities because you have the ERAF variability and you have the pass-through variability. And how do you treat pass-throughs? Becomes incredibly complex modeling. I will tell you, every taxing entity has one of those 4 boxes that's better for them, and one of those 4 boxes that's worse, and 2 that are in the middle. And I really end with that comment because that's not why any of us are here. That is above and beyond our pay grade. It's at the state level. It's part of legislation. It is part of the budget trailer bill, and it will affect all of our agencies. And the costs that are taken out by the state or the county and how these determinations are made are really the biggest drivers of how much money any taxing entity is going to get out of the whole redevelopment dissolution. And that kind of concludes our first brush to begin introducing you to these issues. As we get more data and examples from the county and the state, we'll provide those to you because Jenny's for the town of Los Gatos is the budget manager. We're struggling what to tell our council Monday night is a likely residual or tax increment, residual tax increment pass through to the town because we get 9.3% versus a one-time bump of fund balance distribution because we're pacing here in the town a 5 to 6% budget gap that we'd like to close, and if there's magic money coming from the dissolution of redevelopment, that would help close the gap. But trying to predict in any accurate way for our council what number to use becomes a challenge, and you all share that challenge with us. So it's just a teaser, a lot more to come. We'll be calling on the county and state to help us on this in the future, but I wanted to just tee it up for you because I think it is the core question that many of us ask. And I know in one meeting with one taxing entity, they said, well, when do you think you can give us a preview of the numbers? And I naively said, May 1st. That was way naive. It was
What year?
Yeah, better question. And then when you add litigation that is almost certainly to arise out of this, whether or not from this county or statewide, that could freeze everything in the time being, you know, it for budget officers becomes a real struggle on what to do. So that's a teaser with much more to come, but it's why we're all in public service, because we like these fascinating challenges. So that ends the executive director's report, and we have a list of future agenda items, and that, I think we're done.
Okay, anybody have any questions of the executive director or any other items they want to add? Obviously, we're adding the one item that was discussed today to the next agenda. Anything else?
I have just a couple of hopefully in-grade level questions, and if not, no worries. So the fund balance distribution being the one-time distribution, and then the increments being the ongoing.
Correct.
Do we have at least a time fence around the one-time distribution, and forget we don't
It's
try to
not-
forecast the number, but the time? Sometime
We have sequestered funds at the direction of the state controller, who has authority, really. When you look at the legislation, all authority here is distributed among all entities. It appears the state controller has disproportionate authority regarding those issues, and we will be reporting those. For me, taking off my agency director hat and as town manager, I will be advising my council. We expect some level of one-time distribution next year, next fiscal year. That is assuming there's no litigation or legislation that freezes all this.
Right.
So with that caveat, from a budgetary hat perspective, which in taking your other hat.
That's exactly what I've been doing. I'm setting expectations. There's a possibility it's sometime in 12/13, and the amount I won't comment on. So, and then secondarily, the affordable housing variable, do we at least know what's in our ROPS for affordable housing? Or it's not really material to this redevelopment agency, right? Yeah, I noticed that in the governor's May revise too, and I thought I don't think that's terribly relevant to this RDA.
Find it could be in that 20% affordable housing fund balance, and the county components as well,
Okay.
appears to flow back to this distribution under the governor's May revise, while
Right.
under the assembly bill, ultimately the Senate president supports as well, that would not occur.
Okay.
But it's all speculative and not worth focusing on.
Yep,
really,
yep.
because
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, seeing nothing else, we will see everybody in 12 days, May 29th, 3:30. We are adjourned.